Hello and welcome. This is the first of two lectures dedicated to the Send Feedback user journey. I decided to divide this topic in two, as one lecture would have been too long. In this first half, we will introduce the Send Feedback user journey, change the contact navbar link text, create a contact controller to implement the Send Feedback journey behavior, design the Contact Us page with Bootstrap forms, print the user's feedback to the console when they submit the form. In the second part of this lecture, we will complete the journey by setting up Spring Boot configuration for development and production and creating an email service with Spring Email so that the DevOps Buddy application can send us an email with the user's feedback. In the lecture on the overall architecture, we have defined several user journeys. In the previous lecture, we have completed the Check Your Company Info journey, where users click on the About link and they see the About page with marketing info and featurettes. In this lecture, we will go through the Send Feedback journey. Users will click on the Contact Us link and they will be redirected to a Bootstrap form where they will be able to provide us with some feedback. Upon submitting the form, DevOps Buddy will send us an email with the user's feedback. To implement this business capability, we will need to go through the following topics. First, we will need to change the navbar to display the Contact Us text. Then, we will need to create a contact controller to handle the Contact Us actions. Next, we will need to create the Contact Us page with a Bootstrap form and create the necessary methods in the contact controller to handle users' feedback. We will then need to create what I call variable configuration, that is Spring Boot configuration for development and production, so that our application can run with different behavior depending on the deployment environment. Finally, we will create an email service with two implementations, a mock one for development, that is one that doesn't send emails for real but simply logs the email content to the console, and one for production, which sends real emails. We will conclude the lecture by testing the functionality and closing the Git flow workflow. The first thing we need to do is to ensure we are pointing at the develop branch. We can do this with the git command git checkout develop. Then we will create a new feature branch named feedback, where we will be writing all the code related to the Send Feedback journey. We can do this with the git commands git checkout -b feedback, git push -u origin feedback. We will need to change the text for the contact link on the navbar. We can do this by opening the navbar.html page under the common folder and adding a ThymeLeaf text attribute with the property navbar contact text. We will assign to this property the value contact as. We will also remove the contact text from within the anchor element. In order to keep things nice and tidy, we will need to make sure that the property is positioned properly in the messages.properties file. It's likely that IntelliJ has added it to the bottom of the file, so we can cut and paste it under the navbar section. If you find it easier to add the property to the messages.properties file first, feel free to do so. My personal preference, probably due to my habit of writing code using a TDD approach, is to write the property in the HTML file first and clean up the messages.properties file afterwards. This way, I'm sure there won't be any spelling mistakes. Next, we will change the href link for the home link to point to / as currently it's pointing to hash. If we restart the application now, we shall see the new text for the Contact Us link in the navbar. Next, we will need to create a plain old Java object, commonly referred to as Pojo, to hold the feedback information. We will name it Feedback Pojo and will place it under the web domain frontend package. Right-click on the frontend package, select New Class and name it Feedback Pojo. Since this object might potentially travel across several JVMs, we will have it implement the serializable interface and declare the serial version UID constant with a hard-coded value 1L. This is a technique frequently used to avoid class cast exception when we make changes to the class. With this value, we are basically saying that, while we want the class to be serializable, we guarantee for it to always be valid, as we won't be having any sticky sessions or persisted to disk. Next, we will add the following properties and their getters and setters: email, first name, last name, and feedback. To facilitate debugging, we will also add the toString method for all properties except the serial version UID. We will use a string builder to collect the output, as I prefer it to string concatenation. Although in earlier Java versions this would have also led to better performance, in recent JVMs the bytecode of the two approaches is equivalent. Great! Now that we have a Pojo to capture users' feedback, we can create a contact controller and write the method which will handle the GET request for the contact as link. Please note that I've talked of GET request. This is because the send feedback journey is composed of two requests. When users click on the contact as link, the browser sends a GET request to the contact controller, which creates an empty feedback Pojo object, sets it in the Spring model map object, and redirects the users to the contact as form. When users enter feedback information in the form and click on the Submit button, the browser sends a POST request to the contact controller POST method. This method receives as argument a feedback Pojo with the information the user entered. The great thing about Spring MVC is that the framework fills the feedback Pojo for us, provided we follow the correct syntax. Let's see how this works in practice. Let's start by making sure that the href for the contact as link has got the value /contact. We can do this in the navbar.html page. Now, we can create a new controller named contact controller under the web controllers package, and we can annotate it with the add_controller annotation as usual. Then, we will add the contact_get method, which receives a model map object as argument. Spring will instantiate one for us and will pass it to the method as argument. This method needs to create an empty feedback Pojo, set it in the model as a key value pair, and return the viewName contact. We will define the constant contact as viewName to contain the viewName, and the constant feedback model key to hold the feedback Pojo key name in the model map. Declaring constants instead of hard-coding strings is generally a good practice, especially if we are using TDD, as the constants can be used by automated tests as well. Such approach is much better than having to hard-code strings all over the shop, and it keeps our code more maintainable. As for the viewName, the first contact word indicates the folder under templates, and the second, the viewName. We will now add the request mapping annotation so that this method handles the /contact_get request, and we will add the property method equal request method.get. Defining the method for get requests is not strictly necessary, as this is the default. However, for journeys that require more than one request type, like in our case, explicitly declaring the method is good practice, as it increases readability. Now that we have a method to handle the request, we need to create the contact as page. We will use a bootstrap form to capture the user's input. We can start by copying the index.html page to the source main resources templates contact folder and renaming the file as contact.html. Then, we can remove the container div, as we will be replacing it with a bootstrap form. In order to create the form, we need to create a bootstrap container div and a row div. Then, we will use a bootstrap grid system to define a column with classes callMeD6 and callMeDoffset3. This will effectively center the form, since we are saying, "Hey Bootstrap, occupy the first 3 columns with nothing, then dedicate the next 6 columns to our form, and then leave the next 3 columns blank." Since the total number of columns in the grid system is 12, Bootstrap will place the form in the center of the display area. Next, we will add a Bootstrap well div to give the form a nice padding, and another div within it with a Bootstrap class text center to center the h1 and p elements text which we are about to create. We can now add an h1 element with a TimeLift text attribute for the property contact h1 text, to which we will assign the value "we value your feedback." We will then add a p element with the Bootstrap class lead and the TimeLift attribute text with the property contact pLead, to which we will assign the value "please let us know what you think." Now we can add a form element. We will set the following attributes: ID with value contact form, taction with value /contact between curly braces preceded by an @ t8 object with value $feedback between curly braces. Please notice the $operator. This is a variable expression operator, and it's used to select a value from a map of variables set in the context. Do you remember when we set an empty feedback pojo in the model map? We used the key feedback. Thanks to the $operator, TimeLeaf can select that object, perform operations on it, and make it available for children elements. We will then specify a method attribute with value post, as each submission will create a new feedback object. This follows the RESTful API verbs convention, as discussed in the introductory lecture on forms and REST. Finally, we will use the Bootstrap class textLeft, as we want the form to be left aligned. Next, we will create the various form elements. First, we will create a div element with a Bootstrap class form group. Inside this div, we will create a label element and a for attribute with, as value, a text property set to form email, to which we will assign the value email. We will also create an input element of type email with ID set to email. Now please pay attention to what I'm going to do for the input type. We will add a new TimeLeaf attribute called thfield. This attribute defines the Pojo property name and uses an asterisk as an operator. This is the fourth TimeLeaf operator we encounter since we have started the course. So far we have learned that the @operator defines a link and the hash operator defines an I18N property. We have just learned that the $operator selects values from a map and the asterisk operator defines an object property. Make sure that the thfield name matches exactly the feedback Pojo attribute name, including lower and uppercase characters. I'll now go ahead and paste the code for the first name and last name properties, since these are very similar to the email one. Please take your time to pause the video and copy exactly what you see on the screen. As part of these two form elements, we have defined two new I18N properties, form.firstName and form.lastName, to which we will assign respectively the values first name and last name. We can now enter a form element to capture the user's feedback. The only difference compared to the previous element is the use of a text area input type instead of an input element. We will set the ID and for attributes to feedback, and will create the I18N property contact feedback form text to the value your feedback. The last form element we need to enter is the submit button. Here we won't have a label element. We will use the Bootstrap classes btn and btn primary so that the button displays in blue, and the TimeLeaf text attribute with the property form submit, to which we will assign the value submit. Now, let's make sure that the messages.properties file is tidy by entering a comment to define the contact form section, and by separating all the contact properties from the rest. When we restart the application and point the browser to localhost 8080, clicking on the Contact as link shows the form. Thanks to Bootstrap, this looks much nicer than a standard HTML form. Notice that we didn't have to write any CSS code, as Bootstrap takes care of it on our behalf. Now that we have a form through which users can send us feedback, we need to handle the form content. We will start by adding a new method to the contact controller to handle the post request. Initially, we will just log the Pojo content to the console. Later, we will introduce Spring configuration for development and production, and will write an email service. We can open the contact controller class and add the method contact post. The method will need to return the same view name as the corresponding get method, but there are a few things we will need to do differently. First, we will need to accept as argument the feedback Pojo. We will need to declare the @model attribute annotation and define the model map key as value. This annotation tells Spring that it should take the values from the feedback form and automatically fill a feedback Pojo. We will then need to annotate the method with the request mapping annotation. This time, however, we will need to specify post as method. Finally, we will declare a logger and print to the console the Pojo's content. I'll use the SLF4J shortcut as demonstrated in the lecture on logging. You can either use the same or declare it manually. When we restart the application and go through the feedback process, upon clicking submit, we will see that the feedback Pojo content is printed to the console. Great work! This concludes the first part of the send feedback journey. In the second part, we will be looking at Spring configuration and Spring Boot email.